Welcome. This is a Hypertalk, so an hour and a half on Trawniki, Nexus of the Final Solution, project visualizing a Campscape and its microhistories. We have Caroline Sedley-Coles, Kevin Coles, and Joanna Sofia Spira from the University of Huddersfield, and then Tom Bryan from Staffordshire University. And they have colleagues semi here in absenteeism and Zoom as well, and I'll let you choose for them. We're going to have an hour for the presentation and then ask a question. I think I just put my coffee down, sorry.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Vicky mentioned, 4 of us are going to speak today, but this is very much an international project with an incredible array of team members, many of whom can't be with us today, 2 of whom actually who are in Ukraine and on their way trying to get back to Israel. So we're very grateful to them for their contributions to this project in these very difficult times. So I'm going to begin the presentation by introducing the project and also the site on which we've worked. And then Kevin will move on to explain an overview of our methodology and some of the specific work that we've been doing around laser scanning and photogrammetry. Tom is going to demo some of the results from the project for you, and Joanna is going to give you a case study of one of the structures within the camp that we've been focusing on as a microhistory. So to begin with, Trawniki is located now in Poland. It was under Nazi occupation. It's located in the Lublin district and on the roads and railway lines that connected eastern Poland to Ukraine, so strategically very important. It was in the general government area of Nazi-occupied Poland during World War II. If you have heard of Trawniki at all, probably the reason will be that almost every testimony that has been provided by survivors who encountered the so-called Trawniki men will mention these individuals, often referring to them as Ukrainians, as some of the most brutal guards that they encountered in the death camps and in the ghettos. The Trawniki men were trained by the SS in Trawniki in order to be auxiliary guards. So they helped in places like Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, Auschwitz, Janowska camp in Ukraine, and in the roundups in many of the camps and ghettos. Most famously, you may well have heard of John Demjanjuk, who was purported to have been a guard in Treblinka, who actually ended up turning out to be a guard in Sobibor. But there were, we think, around 5,000 of these men trained in Trawniki, and they were put through military drills, and they were trained to round up Jews and to execute them. As I say, they were often called Ukrainians, but they were from many parts of the Soviet Union. Some were also ethnic Germans as well. Some were Soviet prisoners of war, and later Soviet civilians were enlisted into the camps. But the place where these men were trained, Trawniki, has received far less attention. So our project wanted to focus on the site of Trawniki as it existed at the time, and its evolution in the years since. And here you can see some photos of the Trawniki training camp, which was built around this sugar factory, a pre-war sugar factory. It made use of existing structures, such as the accommodation for sugar factory workers. So the building you can see here, for example, was the Kommandantur, where the commander of the camp, Karl Streibel, lived and worked. And many of the other buildings as well were co-opted as accommodation for the SS, who would train the Trawniki men, and then the Trawniki men's accommodation themselves. And here you can see a visit by Himmler, who took a special interest in Trawniki and led to its creation. We know about the training camp from many important articles that have been written by colleagues such as Peter Black from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum and David Rich, for example. But actually, Trawniki was not just one camp. Actually, there may well have been some form of ad hoc camp there from 1939 onwards, shortly after the war broke out. And certainly we know that Jews were mistreated in this region from the beginning of World War II. Shortly after the invasion of the Soviet Union, 22nd of June 1941, former Soviet prisoners of war and civilians were sent to the camp initially as punishment. And the camp was supposedly serving as a holding pen of people who were of interest to Nazi Germany because they were seen as a threat. Thereafter, the training camp was opened on the 27th of October 1941, and as I mentioned, Karl Streibel was appointed as commandant. And the training camp itself was in operation until July 1944, when the camp was eventually dismantled. But in April 1942, there was also a labour camp for Jews that was constructed to the west of the training camp as well. And the history of this camp has had very little written about it. And Jews who were held here, it's important to say, were used in the training of the Trawniki men. So when they were being taught to round up Jews and to execute them, they were learning how to do that in Trawniki with Jews who were held in this particular camp before they were deployed elsewhere across Poland and Eastern Europe. And this camp was run by a commandant called Franz Barteczko, who was known to the prisoners to be extremely brutal, and then later on by Joseph Nepirella, who likewise prisoners describe as a tormentor of the Jewish population. Like all camps, there were different phases. So for some people, Trawniki labour camp was seen as a better place to be living, and was seen as somewhere that Jews could get some respite from the experiences that they had, for example, in the Warsaw Ghetto. But as time went on, particularly from August 1942, and then after the Warsaw Ghetto uprising from April 1943 onwards, conditions in the camp really worsened. So there was a high mortality rate in the camp, executions were constantly being carried out, and the whole landscape became one where mass graves and body disposal sites took place. And also Trawniki was central to a huge killing action called Operation Erntefest, Operation Harvest Festival, that took place on the 3rd of November 1943. When many people speak about this event, they speak about the executions that happened at Majdanek and that 40,000 Jews were killed during this operation. We think around 10,000 of those Jews were killed at Trawniki. Their bodies then were buried in mass graves initially, then exhumed, cremated and reburied in ash pits in the terrain of this camp. So it has a very complex history. So our project is the first really to deliver an archaeological investigation of the landscape of Trawniki, and our overall objective is to write a new historical, spatial and archaeological account of the site. We want to highlight its role as a nexus of the final solution. The men who were trained there were central, as I said, to the mass extermination of Jews, and also its situational position in terms of industry, manufacture, and the sorting of belongings that were taken from Jews killed in the death camp were also fundamental to the final solution programme. We also want to look at the Trawniki men as occupying this grey zone between victims and perpetrators, because many of these Trawniki men were first Soviet POWs who were threatened with execution if they were not recruited to go and become Trawniki men. And we also want to look at the role of Trawniki men as important witnesses to the Holocaust, because many of these men saw what was happening, of course, in places like Treblinka, Auschwitz, Belzec, etc., and they provided testimony in their proceedings against them in the Soviet Union when they were captured after the war. I should say the project is very generously funded by the Claims Conference, and we are incredibly grateful for their support, and it's also received some financial support from the University of Huddersfield and the University of Staffordshire as well. The main output of this project is going to be an innovative digital monograph. You'll see some of the source material that we are going to integrate into it throughout the rest of the presentation, but essentially we will have a digital version of the book, which will be written in the usual way that a monograph is written. But when you encounter source material, you'll be able to listen to audio testimonies, to watch videos of survivors and witnesses. You'll be able to make full screen documents and investigate them with translations. And you'll also be able to navigate around the 3D models, 3D visualizations and archaeological data that we've collected across 3 field seasons in Trawniki as well. So we hope that will make for a much richer experience and hopefully will allow some of the voices of the different people who experienced Trawniki to really come through to our readers. There will be a printed version as well. So of course we have to navigate how we create a digital book alongside a printed one. But that's a challenge we're excited to embrace. I should say one of the biggest challenges with working at Trawniki is the form that the site takes today. Unlike many of the other places that I've just mentioned, Trawniki is not a memorial site. It's not a protected area in any way. Its development has not been hindered at any point by the fact that it had these camps occupying the space. It is an urban site, it is a living landscape where people live and work in the surviving buildings from the camp terrain. So when the camp was demolished, the buildings that existed before the war were repurposed once again because they were solid structures. That's exactly why the Nazis took them over in the first place. So these buildings here, for example, were the SS buildings, and this was the sugar factory that went back into use. You can see there's huge warehouses on this site now. So Trawniki is in fact one of the largest chemical manufacturing plants in all of Europe, where they make predominantly bathroom and kitchen cleaning products, and most of the area that contained the barracks, so this is the Jewish camp area here, most of those barracks were taken down immediately after the war, and most of that space is now occupied by these huge warehouse buildings, whereas some of the areas around the training camp remain either semi-rural or just simply reused. And you can see some of this is what Trawniki looks like today. So access to this site was tightly controlled. You have to have permission from the chemical manufacturing company. The number of times we nearly got run over by forklift trucks, I lost count, because this is a heavy industry area while we were doing the survey work. And as I said, people are living in these spaces. So when we are documenting the camp, we are obviously recording people's homes and people's businesses, and there are many ethical issues connected with that, of course, which I'll discuss a little bit more about later. I should also say that, like any camp, we're not just interested in what happened within the boundaries. So one of the other challenges we face is that Trawniki is a huge site anyway with a very complex history, but it also comprised of forests where Soviet POWs and Jews were shot in 1941 and 1942. So you can see Borek Forest here and Dombrova Forest here. So conversely, we have a very rural environment with lots of trees obstructing the survey areas to tackle, and contend with as well. And there are various other sites and subcamps in the area as well that have a connection that we're also interested in. And I said the site is not protected as a memorial, but there are some memorialisation efforts that have happened. Our very good friends Piotr and Agnieszka Severuk, who are two local activists, created the mural that you can see here on the wall back in the mid-2000s. This is actually quite a good picture compared to how it was 2 weeks ago when we were there. Most of this facade has now completely fallen down and is crumbling, and now there is a big debate about whether or not this memorial is going to be reinstated. There is another memorial which acknowledges the victims of Nazism who were murdered here, and does mention this plaque at the bottom, mentions Operation Ernstfest, so that killing on the 3rd of November 1943. And then there are other memorials, mostly crosses in the forest, with lots of local stories about what these graves may or may not represent. So our investigative avenues are multifaceted, some which we set out to do originally and some which have emerged over the course of the project. Firstly, we are very interested in mapping the camp and the different camps in the various phases. So we're using very, very well-known mainstream archaeological tools like geographical information systems, for example, aerial photo analysis, to look at how the camp changed over time and how that reflects the different prisoner demographics. Particularly, we've been locating mass graves within and beyond the camp boundaries. We've chosen not to speak about that too much today because we want to focus on some of the other aspects, but we've been successful so far in locating 10 potential, highly likely mass grave sites around the camp area, and we've confirmed many of those with ground penetrating radar as well to see what exists beneath the ground. So we've basically shown that this camp is a multifaceted killing site and a multifaceted burial space. We've also been looking to document the other traces of victims, the SS and the Trawniki men. So we'll focus today a lot on the graffiti, for want of a better word, or marks that have been left in the camp landscape by those various groups. We've been seeking out objects, and we've been seeking out biographies of many well-known and lesser-known individuals who were held in this camp. And we are hoping in the second phase of the project that we're going to build the first ever names database of people who were actually housed in Trawniki, because we've actually come across lots of names lists and lots of people, often serendipitously, who had relatives in Trawniki whose biographies we've become very fascinated with, and we would really like to acknowledge that and integrate that into our work. And community engagement and dissemination has obviously been a huge part of this project, because when we're on site, we're very visible, with people wandering around with strange pieces of equipment, and we obviously have to ask permission to enter their homes, their properties, and we're working with lots of school groups in the local area and the local cultural centre, and of course with the diaspora abroad as well. One of the real reasons as well that this is really important, apart from the fact that Trawniki hasn't been really discussed in the sense of the site, is because something that I've found in my other work in Holocaust archaeology and the sort of investigation of post-war forensic reports and criminal proceedings, is that often sites, one map gets attached to these sites, and when sites are spoken about, witnesses, survivors, they're asked to refer to these maps, sometimes, not always, to say what they remember about the landscape. And in the case of Trawniki, this one map, which was created as a kind of speculative plan of what the camp might look like by the SS Bauleitung, has been used in most post-war trials in Germany, for example, against Karl Streibel. It's been used on the mural and the wall, at Trawniki. And so when people are recollecting what they remember about Trawniki, they're using a map which conceptualises what should have existed and not what did exist. So as archaeologists, we feel very strongly that we need to use a lot of digital tools, a lot of field craft to find the traces of the evidence, so that we can come up with, as I say, this more accurate sequential series of maps to enhance the history. And also to tackle some of the other challenges, before I let Kevin hand over and talk about how we've done this. I think the perceptions of Trawniki, as I said, is one thing that we have to continually grapple with. There are many of these, from people not knowing where the site is, what the site was, to people having this particular association with these Ukrainian guards that they believe were present at the site. And that is very much politically at the moment. The topic of Ukrainians in Poland is a very hot topic. We've been confronted with lots of difficult political opinions around that issue when we've been in the field. We've been confronted with lots of people who've wanted to help us and have said, we've been waiting for you to come and do this work. And then we've been presented with a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of hatred towards the people who were there, and also a lot of sympathy for the Germans being rather nice people, in this context compared to Ukrainians. So we're always working in this very difficult, very fraught, challenging environment. We've also found, like with many sites, that even though we thought that there wouldn't be many sources when we started out, the scale of the archive that we have amassed is around about 30 gigabytes minus the archaeological work we've done. So that's just in terms of archive material that we've collected from many archives all over the world, and this material is in many languages. I should have said that the Jews who were sent to Trawniki were Polish, but also from Germany, from the Czech Republic, from Slovakia, from many other places around the world. And so we have lots of testimonies and lots of source material in different languages. We also, as archaeologists, of course, are dealing with, as you'll see, some very different types of data. And so one big challenge for us is to make sure that we can translate the archaeological data that we collect for a wider audience, to make it understandable and to demonstrate why it enhances our knowledge about the history of this site. And finally, I've already mentioned that obviously this is a living landscape, and there are also various religious and ethical issues that surround the work that we do. So for example, as Kevin will explain, most of our work is non-invasive because Jewish religious law forbids usually the excavation of mass graves. So far on this project, we've taken a non-invasive approach to surveying the landscape, which may ultimately lead to excavation later, we hope. But we are, as a result of that, collecting vast quantities of digital data, some of which are visualizations, which are easier to understand, some of which image what exists beneath the ground and is more abstract. So a key part of our project is to how to present that in a meaningful way. And we hope that the digital book format that we've come up with will be a really good way to do that, in terms of allowing people to spend more time engaging with that material in context. So I'll stop for now. I think I'll come back at the end to conclude, but I'll hand over to Kevin, who's now going to explain a little more about the methodology that we employed.
Thanks, Caroline. So yeah, just a little bit of background history to our group. So Caroline, as part of her Master's and PhD, developed a non-invasive method for investigating sites of the Holocaust, and this was 15 years ago. So sort of the techniques we employ on these sites now stem from that, and it's always evolving. We're always learning how to use new digital technology to accomplish the ultimate aim of undertaking this work in a ethical and sensitive manner, respecting religious and sensitivities that may exist around the communities who live in these locations, as well as the past communities who were impacted by the atrocities that we are recording. So we've currently worked at over 60 sites of the Holocaust. We've also expanded our work out to other genocides, particularly a project in Bosnia and Namibia, Cyprus and other locations. So we do think, though, that Caroline chooses her sites on how difficult they are to investigate, because Trawniki 100% fits that bill. There are always complexities about undertaking Holocaust archaeology, but yeah, this is just the latest site that follows on from work at Treblinka and in the Channel Islands, both of which were extremely challenging. This is no different. So just a little bit about methodology before we talk specifically about some of the results. I should just say that we have just returned from Poland on fieldwork now, so some of the things we're presenting to you today is sort of hot off the press, and we're still processing and figuring out exactly the importance of some of this data. But like any archaeological projects, we don't start with digital techniques, digital methodologies. We start with people. That's where all our projects start. Understanding the communities which we want to go and work within. So making contacts within the environments where we are going to suddenly turn up with our equipment and do this work. And also the survivors, second, third generation survivors of the Trawniki camp in this case, but also of the Holocaust more widely. And it's connecting with people all over the world who have links to Trawniki. And this is a thing which we've been really taken aback by in terms of where these links have taken us, who we've spoken to in different countries, and they all link back to Trawniki. And it's finding those links, and that's a surprise to us in terms of the sheer volume of resources that we've managed to accomplish. So it all starts off with archival research, and that's a large part of the project. Certainly the early phase of the project, archival research is all we do. And that's why our team we're quite happy that our team is bilingual. We cover lots of languages, not me, myself, but a lot of my colleagues cover lots of the languages. So we get as much archival information in these projects as possible. And really, when we start a project, they never really end. I think we've experienced that truth from our work in these other sites, such as Treblinka. You never finish working on these sites when you start, because you'll always be researching another project, and then you'll find something about Trawniki. And then that'll revisit you back into the project again. So archives are so important. And part of the archival process involves trying to get aerial imagery from the site of which you're investigating. And again, part of a team who isn't here today, Chris Going is an aerial photographic specialist. So again, he's scoured the world for photographs of Trawniki when the camp was in operation. And he sent us so many images of annotations telling us where we should be looking for evidence. Over 150 sites across Trawniki he identified for us. So we visited these sites, we sort of matched photographs, historic photographs to the modern landscape, and again it's a facet of the work which is so important. And also we looked for other investigations that have happened on these sort of sites. So that's in the aftermath of the war and also since. So forensic investigation reports, medical reports, reports linked to prosecutions and the legal cases that arose from Trawniki. So understanding what other people have done on the site is also a very important part of our research. So we need to know what's gone before and how our work can amend and add to that process. And as part of that, understanding what all testimonies are present in archives around the world is so important. And that's, again, what we spend a lot of our time doing. But also, during the course of the work, if there's any individuals who we find who has useful information about these camps, but perhaps who haven't been interviewed before, it's part of the project that we interview these people, which literally just done in Trawniki just last week. So it all forms part of a database which we then work towards presenting the results in the digital publication that Caroline has already mentioned. But also you have to be aware that you can't do everything. So if we come across any particular facet of this project where we do need to bring in additional help, such as the aerial photographic expert, for example, then we bring those in as consultants to sort of create a full account of these sites that we're investigating. But ultimately there comes a time when digital data collection then takes over, and these are the sort of field methods we've adopted working on these Holocaust sites over the last sort of 15 years. And they range from everything from sort of satellite and spatial data that's been collected over the past 15 years, right through to LiDAR, which is a technique which produces 3D models of the ground, even in dense forests. So you look for depressions and particularly useful for if you're investigating where mass graves might be located. So all of these sort of techniques and methods add to what we know from the testimonies. So we take the testimonies first, they tell us where we should be looking, and then we target this equipment and these methods on those particular locations. And that's the sort of methodology that we've adopted. So all of these methods are digital in nature, but also non-invasive. So when we arrive at the site and do these equipment technologies, we leave again and there's no indication that we've been there. So they're not like traditional archaeological methods that you might think of. So these are all the above ground. So because Trawniki is a very complex site, we've already heard about its history, we felt that remote sensing the site and getting some indication of these buildings that exist at the moment and trying to ascertain which buildings were present at the time and which buildings have been demolished played a big part in how we used this initial technology. But obviously we are archaeologists, so we do like to know what's below the ground. We can't get away from that. And that's where our geophysical equipment comes in. So there are different types of geophysical equipment. The one specifically that we've utilised in Trawniki is ground penetrating radar. So this maps the subsoil looking for changes in buried material. So these changes in buried material could come from anything, ranging from sort of modern things that are in the ground, so pipes, trenches, utilities, that sort of thing, right through to buried objects that date to the camp's operation. So understanding the difference between those two sets of results is very important, and the interpretation of data is what makes it quite challenging sometimes. And then we bring it together. So we bring all the archival research into specialised integration software programs like Geographical Information Systems, GIS, and the GPR data all comes together into one location. And that's predominantly creates three-dimensional views of the site, which I'll show you in a second. So a sense that the sort of method to think about is we start from the macro level, looking at the camp as a whole, the landscape as a whole, and the sites connected with it, down to micro level investigation. A micro level investigation is obviously what we want to talk to you about today. Two of those smaller projects are the micro investigations that come off the face of our large scale work. So the macro level survey takes everything that you see around Trawniki, including the forest site that Caroline has mentioned, and then we overlay historical photographs in the right place to understand how the landscape has changed, because for us as archaeologists the key thing to understand is how the landscape has changed since the camp was in operation. And that's so important for us to understand that, because otherwise we'd be interpreting things as camp related that actually turn out to be something that happened in the 70s or 80s or 90s. Relevant still, but not in the context of what was going on at the camp at the time. So to do this, we use drone technology. So we drone capture huge amounts of land. Again, non-intrusive, so we don't specifically have to get 800 people's permission to take this high-level photography. And that's a consideration with a site as complicated like this, where you've got so many landowners, so many people living in these buildings, it's actually quite problematic. And then we move on to more laser scanning technology, which Tom is going to speak about in a minute. So this is Tom laser scanning one of the buildings that were in existence during the camp's operation, but is still in existence today. So it may have traces of important evidence related to the camp's operation. And we sort of create 3D fly-through videos, so such as this. So it's a way of picturing the site in 3 dimensions without having the complex land ownership issues about working in very tight, small spaces. And also a lot of the sites that we work at using the more geophysical investigations, like such as this one here, is you can see what the site was like when we completed our survey. So this is a very important site, because this is the area of one of the mass graves associated with the Harvest Festival massacre. So also these buildings with the orange roofs that you see now and again in this video, they are vitally important for the second case study, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'll just introduce Tom now, just to talk about how this video was completed and how the data capture worked.
Sure. Yes, yeah, well, this is playing. Just talk about how this was. Yeah, so this was this was from the drone footage captured when we went into before we went in 2022. So like over 3,000 images taken from a drone at various angles, and thrown it into reality captured to produce this high quality model. I've kind of constantly been developing ways to sort of improve that model. Right now, just trying to process it in chunks rather than the whole thing at once, to have like more detail when you zoom into it. You can see some of the GPR laid over there is just kind of an experiment of how we present that data and what it looks like overall, just to get a sense of where we've scanned and what is where. So yeah, I'll fly through some other scans we've taken. So aside from that, obviously, yeah, we've scanned on sites such as, should we do this one? So this was the site of the Swenger House. So this was done with the Faro scanner, as you can see. I'll fly around this kind of raw data of it. It sits on a tripod. You set the settings right, and just put it in various locations to capture a scene. From every angle possible, so you're not like missing any bits of it. Particularly challenging when you're outside and it's sunny, and it takes you'll be there over several hours while shadows are shifting on the ground, so that kind of it can be challenging to match up the data or make it look good when you've got that kind of change happening. So like cloudy days are ideal, but obviously with us being limited of time there, we kind of have to take what we can get. And this is being passed on to Xiaolo, who is helping with like an architectural reconstruction of one of the houses. And so we'll be able to place that on here and have this to scale data. It's like millimeter accurate. Do good work with that. So this is kind of one of the large scale things of various sites we've taken of like buildings from all around. What should we do next?
If I just explain the basements, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, before I put that one up.
So one of the key parts of the project that we want to talk to you about today is the basements that we've found. So you put the presentation back up. The basements are really important sources of evidence. So these basements exist within the existing buildings that we've pointed out with the orange buildings, and they effectively contain inscriptions, graffiti, pictographs, proof of life evidence of people who were in these basements. So these basements were punishment centres, punishment cells. And within them is a complex biography of internees. So we've got the Trawniki men, who have obviously been off to work at the death camps and have returned to Trawniki, and then they've done something wrong, and they've appeared in these punishment cells. Jewish inmates was interred in these cells. SS guards who did something wrong around the camp were interred in these cells. So, and Polish residents. So these are a complex microhistory of biographical evidence that exists in these dark, damp cellars beneath houses that are publicly owned by private individuals or by landlords who then rent them out to tenants. They're really complicated scenarios to get permission to get into them. So one particular cellar was made up of 8 separate rooms, each with a padlock door on it. And you had to get permission from all these different individuals to be able to access these cells and record these names and inscriptions. We undertook lots of different technologies. Obviously, we are talking about dark locations, so we took still photography, video photography, photogrammetry, and we used the Faro laser scanner to scan the environment of these rooms, but also a handy scan specific laser scanner to focus upon the actual inscriptions themselves. And the inscriptions ranged from names and dates, so we can chase the biographies of these individuals. Where were they before Trawniki? Where did they go after Trawniki if they survived? Right through to pictures, trees, houses sketched into the mortar on the brick walls. So Tom is just going to again demo some of his results.
Yeah.
Just talk you through the process.
I suppose, yeah, go to the... I'll fly outside this basement. So this was the... one of the houses. So going down to the basement here, we wanted some kind of context of what the outside is like, so we can have sort of a fly in. See, still need to clean up some of the data because I'm standing in it. But yeah, this kind of gives us, kind of a scale reference, and so you can see from above, you can get kind of the plan of the basement there that we can do, glean something interesting from. Then flying down, you can see we also, obviously it's pitch black down there, we had to light it in some way for better capture of data, but we can fly into, most every room we had access to. And this is yet to be processed into something more sort of detailed, more, I guess, visually appealing. And where we can also get the detail of where, graffiti was kind of written in around the edges of these doors. On the bricks and sometimes on the wooden framework. We can fly all the way through his basement. You can see the colours are slightly odd in places. That's because, the lighting conditions are just not ideal. But in addition to taking the laser scans, we've done photogrammetry. So basically walk into each room and taking dozens of photos, moving to the side, taking another photo, moving to the side, taking another photo. Using a flash on the camera to light the space. Because again, you get awkward things like shadows coming up when you're like walking in front of the light and you've got that set up. But I've got kind of a mock-up of how that comes together with this one. Or should I do? Yeah, I'll do this one. You can see this. All these are sort of the camera positions, so you can see hundreds. And where there's these square ones, those are the Faro laser scans. But if I hide those, you can have a bit more of a nicer fly through. You can see when you zoom on here, because of the high detail of the camera capture, you can see where there have been names penciled into the walls. And I think if we go, this one's kind of hard to navigate indoors. But where they've been scratched in as well, which leads us to the closer detailed one, where we captured these with the high resolution laser scanner. Let's go back to this one. I wonder if that's the same as one here. It actually is. That's cool. So this is the handy scan Black Elite. Sub-millimeter precision used in like manufacturing, but we found obviously really great uses for it elsewhere, especially with something like this. And there'll be some where it's very hard to read with the naked eye with all the color and the grime and everything over it. So this should help us kind of get a bit more information, a bit of a clearer picture of it, and find things that we wouldn't see otherwise without scanning in this sort of level of detail. We can apply various effects to these to make it easier as well, sort of different materials, which we've done in software like Blender and Unreal Engine, just to try and help visualize it and get a clear picture of what was down there.
Great. Cool. Put the presentation back on, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think the key thing to remember with this sort of technology is many of the things that we spotted during the sort of field investigations are not really visible to the naked eye. You can sort of make out that they're there, but what we were finding was that because the locations in these basements to write inscriptions is so few, that you had inscriptions over inscriptions over inscriptions. So it's very hard with the naked eye to determine what's what. But with this sort of technology, you can do depth analysis on the inscriptions. So when people write inscriptions, they tend to stick to the same sort of carving depth when they go into the brick. So you can sort of strip away things that are certain depth, and that reveals things that are another depth. And that's a way you can begin to pick up individual names. So we've not completed the count yet, because obviously working in these conditions were problematic. But we are going to we're going to get close to probably 200 individual inscriptions, proof of life, whatever you want to call them, from a multitude of the different biographies of individuals who were in these punishment cells. And why is this important? Just before we move on to case study 2, this is one of the cellars that we recorded in 2022. And we noticed again graffiti, very faint graffiti, on some of the stonework within this cellar. So we completed the sort of similar methodology, photogrammetry, to record these, which helps pick up individual letters, and you can begin to read the names. These are Polish names. And this is what we did in 2022. So again, apply different filters. You can again begin to see the actual names themselves now of these inscriptions. So it's bringing back the non-visible evidence sort of into the visible spectrum. Why this is important is because when we return to the site in 2025, just last week, these names have now been purposely removed by the owners or the tenants of this basement. So this now is the only record we have of what was on that wall, because they've been chiselled away and painted over. So that there is one case study that we are looking at. So now I just want to hand over to my friend and colleague, Joanna, who is going to talk to you about a second case study or microhistory of Trawniki, and that is Operation Harvest Festival and the presence of a very important testimony which will help guide us to where the victims of this particular atrocity may be buried.
Okay. Yes, so it's like a mini project within a larger project, and as Caroline mentioned, we got a lot of archival material, but it is usually fragmented and not very nicely catalogued, so sometimes it's hard to find archival material on Trawniki. But actually those two oral testimonies are very easy to find. If you Google Trawniki, they are probably the first ones that come up in Google search. They are available at the USHMM website. And those were local women who lived in Trawniki and were like young women when the war broke out. And they lived in this wooden house called Drużnikówka, which was named after their father's and then brother's profession, which basically they were like managing the road traffic. Those testimonies are very rich, very, very detailed and very unique, and I will tell you in a second why. During the Antefest massacre on November 3rd, 1943, where all the Jews from the camp were killed in one day, normally the local residents were asked. They had to stay at home inside their homes for 8 hours, and some that lived in the close proximity to the camp, they were removed and moved away from their houses, so they were not witnesses to what was happening at the time. But for some reason, this family wasn't asked to move away. They stayed at home. Probably it was just because the Germans maybe overlooked them, or they lived in such close proximity to the camp that maybe some thought that they were part of the camp administration. And they could see everything through a little window. and we somehow got obsessed with that little window. Because they mentioned like repeatedly that they could see, you know, the whole massacre and through that exact window here. Yes, yeah, 2 of the interviews are recorded inside the house, and then one of the sisters goes outside the house and shows the exact locations. And you know, we are focusing on spatial history, so this is incredibly important to us, this type of information. As it is like a very powerful account, but also gives us actual information that we can interpret with other sources and methodologies that we have. Yes, so I think I will just show you a little excerpts. Yeah, so I have to do this, I think. And yeah, so this is, I mean, as I say, like, it's incredibly rich because they talk also about pre-war Trawniki. Their father even spoke Yiddish. He was obviously non-Jewish Pole and spoke Yiddish to local Jews, so they were, you know, they knew each other very well. They speak also a lot about contacts they have in the camp, like with, you know, the camp administration and, you know, Jews working there. But obviously it's in the whole testimonies, like the 2 testimonies are in Polish, so that's why we're trying to add subtitles and give it more exposure. Yes, so yeah, so these testimonies give us yeah, a lot of information, and yeah, we decided that we wanted to yeah, create some sort of visualization. We wanted to know what could have been seen from this window. Not the massacre itself, but like the trenches and you know, this building was demolished in 2003. But we have, yeah, pictures from, you know, after the war, and it's also, you know, it speaks a lot about our relationships that we have with local residents of Trawniki, because these pictures are actually taken by a local resident who is just, you know, has a hobby. He just takes photographs of random things and posts them on his very, you know, basic website, and, you know, add some very, you know, simple comments. And you would think that this is not, you know, not important, not relevant, but actually for us it's extremely important, and that's why we knew that the building was demolished in 2003, because he went there and took pictures of the building. And there are many, many other pictures that we use actually in our research that he had taken in the past. So yeah, and yeah, we confirmed like the date of the demolition of the house of the municipality. So yes, so this is like a very early stage of visualizing the house and what had been seen from the window. So we are working with an architect, Shalu Wang, who, if you have like more detailed questions about the software, you can send her an email. But she, yeah, she just prepared this first sort of sketch with SketchUp and Twinmotion. And now we are trying also to figure out the interior layout of the house. We have a call scheduled with someone who's related to the family and has some pictures and knowledge about what was inside. And as Tom showed you, like, he also laser scanned the area, so we'll have the exact, you know, measurements and dimensions, and then Shalu will use that to, yeah, make a better visualization of the house with reality capture and Unreal Engine later on. So that's what we're hoping to do. This is, yeah, the area. And this is also important because, as Caroline said, like, so one of the most important parts of our work is to analyze and interpret locations of mass graves. And this was obviously, you know, the biggest mass grave that was in front of the Sawenga's house that we were trying to understand. And last year, when we did the first field work, that was the second field. So first field work, within the project, we surveyed the area. So okay, there's like some confusion about the shape of the trench. So those sisters say that it was zigzag shaped, but those who looked at it from the other side say that it was just a straight line. So we are trying to determine what was the actual shape of the trench. Last year the team surveyed the area that was probably the straight line, and now we got permission to survey the parking lot in front of the municipality building, where most likely the trench was zigzag shaped. So that's why also the testimony was so important, because it was probably just in front of their house where the zigzag shape started. This is just some pictures, because a lot of our fieldwork is just walking around town with local people and listening to their stories and trying to make sense out of it. And most of those people were born after the war, but their testimonies are also important because of those looting locations give us a lot of information about potential mass graves, and they just very interested in the history of their own town. We really appreciate that they spend time with us and show us different things. And this is an anecdote, and also potentially something you can also use in your own research. So when I joined the project last year in March, we went to Trawniki in April. So it was very early in the project. And we collected all the information, all the interviews, conversations with locals. And Caroline asked me to do memory mapping. And I have a background in Jewish studies and history, so not in archaeology. So I thought she just wanted me to see how locals, remembered the town, the camp, the history. So, I was thinking about the words they were using and the narratives. But what Caroline wanted is basically to use Google Earth and put pins in different locations and just describe what people said about those locations, and then, confronted with other sources. And it was just a great exercise and interpretative technique that we can also visualize in a way. We don't know yet if we want to use it as sort of a mini project in the book, or just so we can interpret this information that we have better. But yeah, something that we wanted to show you. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Just to really wrap up, obviously you can probably see that this is a very complex project with lots of different facets to it. We struggled really to choose what we wanted to present, but we wanted to show you some of the things we've most recently done. We've now done 3 seasons of fieldwork in Trawniki. It's probably useful to know that this project actually started because we were approached by National Geographic, who wanted to record us doing some fieldwork. And actually this project was really born out of that initially, before the claims conference then provided funding for us to continue on. So we've now done 3 seasons of fieldwork in Trawniki, and we're now entering the phase where we're very intensively over the next year, we're compiling the digital monograph, where we're continuing to interpret the results and write reports. We also have lots of obligations to report to the Conservator of Monuments in Poland, for example. So we're constantly thinking about all these different audiences that we work with. The academic audiences, the public in Trawniki, as we said, the international community, survivors, their families, and also people from different ages and backgrounds who may or may not be familiar with the digital, with archaeology and with history. But I think hopefully, as we've tried to show today, that I think one of the major strengths of this project is the transdisciplinary team that we have. We have obviously historians, archaeologists, games design specialists. We have people with backgrounds in digital humanities, with Jewish studies, with forensic investigation, geographers. We have a huge array of expertise, and as Joanna mentioned, many incredible consultants like Peter Black, who worked with the Office of Special Investigations in the United States as well on the denaturalization cases of the Trawniki men. So he's providing us with incredible insights into these different aspects of the work as well. So first of all, I would just say that I'm extremely grateful for this incredible team of people for coming together, and I think really pushing the boundaries on forensic archaeological approaches to the investigation of these sites. Hopefully we've tried to show you that if you tailor these different techniques and different forensic archaeological methods, they can lead to new perspectives, to new details that we're going to find out about the history of the camp, and most importantly, as Kevin stressed, about the experiences of the people who were actually housed there. And responding to those ethical challenges, although it is difficult for us, I think hopefully it makes for a better project, because it really forces us to confront our for example, archaeologists usually dig holes. That's clearly not what we do altogether. I mean, we do, but not on this project. We very much strayed away from those traditional perspectives, and it's enabled us to really push the boundaries on that as well. And so another reason for presenting this today in kind of its form, where some of this is, this work is complete, and some of this work is still very much ongoing, is to get feedback and to facilitate those discussions. We now can't see an end to this project. We clearly need further funding for it, which is the big challenge, but there are so many sub-projects and facets to this work that we hope will continue for many years to come. And we're very interested to hear from people who are interested in collaboration and conversation. And finally, just to thank again various participants who've helped us with this, our funders, many local individuals, but particularly, as I said, Dr. Daria Chikaska, who can't be with us today, Dr. Tamir Hod, in particular, who would have presented today and whose work we have amalgamated here, and also our colleague William Mitchell, who did a lot of the field work with us over the 3 seasons of field work as well, who also couldn't be with us today. So thank you very much for your attention, and of course we're very, very happy to answer any questions that you may have.